Hi, I'm Lee Bacon. I am the author of several books for young people. I've written the Joshua Dredd series. That was a 3-book series. I also wrote the Legendtopia series, which was a 2-book series. And I've written a couple of audio original books. One was called The Mystery of Alice, and one was called Interview with the Robot. And then my most recent book was The Last Human, and that came out almost exactly a year ago. Yeah, so that's what I've done so far. I've got some other stuff in the works, but those are the things that are out there so far. The Last Human is, the basic story is, it takes place in the future. The world is ruled by robots. And the book is actually narrated by a robot, and a robot named XR. And, it's totally fine with the situation. It's without humans in the world is, seems a lot more peaceful, and there's no pollution, and it just no crime. And so it just like, from the beginning of the story, the robot is just kind of happy with the situation. And then one day, something totally unexpected happens. The robot meets a human, a human girl named Emma. She's 12 years old. And this, of course, seems impossible because humans are supposed to be extinct. And so then the rest of the story is kind of the robot XR kind of coming over its initial, kind of prejudice against humans, and actually, coming to kind of like form something like a friendship, and actually helping Emma on this journey that she has to go on. And there are also a couple of other fun robots in the story. So they're not alone. XR is joined by a robot named Skid, which is spelled SKD. And Skid is like a cute little robot that only communicates in emojis. So that was kind of fun for me to write, because I would sort of think of like, okay, how would I explain this, but only with pictures and only with emojis? So like, for example, like, a kind of simple one would be like, when it's raining, there'll be a picture of a rain cloud, a cat, and a dog, and that kind of thing. So, but then sometimes it gets a lot more kind of complicated, or like there'll just be like a dot on the page, because you actually see these emojis as you're reading the book. There's like a dot on the page, and that means like you made a good point, or something like that. And then the other robot that joins them on their journey is named Siron. And Siron is like this enormous, humongous, hulking robot. And it has this kind of affection for like old human, kind of like, it's a little bit like, sort of amateur archaeologist of old human stuff, but it doesn't quite understand these things, kind of like looking at some old civilization and trying to understand, why they did what they did. And so it especially appreciates old human jokes, even though it doesn't understand these old human jokes. So yeah, it'll kind of like, tell these jokes, it'll tell these jokes, but then not quite get why it's funny, or why the humans would tell these jokes in the first place. So I was working on a different book at the time, another kid's book. And I was walking home. I'd been doing some shopping at King's downtown in Maplewood. And I was listening to this podcast, the Ezra Klein podcast. And it was with this guy named Yuval Noah Harari, who's written some books for adults. One is called Sapiens. And then the most recent one, I think, or the one that was most recent at the time, was called Homo Deus. And the question was asked, I think it was, do you think humans will be the dominant life form on Earth, will still be the dominant life form on Earth in, I think it was 200 years. It was something like that. And he answered without even missing a beat. He said, no, either we will be, we'll kind of destroy ourselves, or we'll be replaced by our own creation, that is technology. And it was just something about that moment. And it just like the whole kind of like premise of this story like unfolded in my mind. And that, which rarely happens in such a kind of instantaneous way. And so I basically just ran up to the house and dropped the groceries and put away the groceries and abandoned the novel that I was working on and started writing the novel that same day. And that became The Last Human. And from the beginning, I always liked the idea of telling it from the perspective of the robot and that kind of voice, because that allows you to sort of look at humans and look at our human world from this kind of far off and different perspective. And it also allowed for other sort of interesting ways of telling, trying to like tap in who this character is. Cause like, of course, robots don't have like a heart. So you can't say like my heart was beating really fast, but you can say something like, my operating system was overheating or something like that. Or my circuitry was like suddenly like my circuitry was like sparking or something that like that, where you can kind of like connect to it in this way. But yeah, it all traces back to that podcast I was listening to. Had I not been listening to that, I don't know whether I probably would have never written The Last Human. So The Last Human was always, from the beginning, I conceived of it as something for young readers, for kind of ages 8 to 12, which is called middle grade sometimes. I think the main reason is because that's what I've pretty much always written. I mean, I've kind of written, some other stuff, like tried out other stuff for different age groups, but generally I write mostly for that age group. So, and that's everything that's been published. So, I think kind of just by default, I thought of it for young readers, but I also like I like the idea of, presenting this story to young people, because I think, I guess for a couple of reasons. One is like young people, if you're a 10-year-old or 8-year-old, 10-year-old, 12-year-old, you've grown up with this amazing, spectacular technology all your life. From the moment you were kind of aware of it, you've had, you've seen phones, you've seen laptops and tablets, and that was something I think for adults, it's kind of, we've seen it evolve, and, we grew up in a pre-internet age. And so I think part of it was that I thought, I think this is something that, like, especially told from the voice of a machine, I think this is something that could be really interesting for people who have grown up kind of never knowing a world where machines weren't kind of mediating our experiences and helping kind of guide us through our day and yeah, like helping us basically, but also sometimes harming us or distracting us, or all of the kind of like darker sides of technology. So I thought that was something, and then I think I think it was also just there's certain kind of like, I don't know, I guess I just kind of maybe I just have like the mind of a 12-year-old, but I always sort of like go to that that sort of like perspective of like, how would I want to read this if I were a kid? And so I think it just kind of like, I instantly like sort of went into that frame of reference. So it started with this podcast. I think Sapiens and Homo Deus, both by that author I mentioned earlier, Yuval Harari, because I think they're looking at kind of like human history. Like, so Sapiens is kind of like looking more at the past, at human history, and then Homo Deus is looking at our future and kind of trying to kind of like take who we are as humans and how we fit into the world and use that to sort of try to predict some things that are going to happen in the future and understand what's happening to us now too. So those were the main, I think, like the kind of things that I kept going back to when I was writing this and trying to think about this, but certainly there were others. I mean, like WALL-E, of course, is like, I mean, kind of looking at stories about robots and about technology. WALL-E is I think like such a wonderful movie anyway. And it was interesting with that. I was kind of thinking about it. I had it in my mind. Or Iron Giant is another one, an animated film. I was, I found myself like thinking about these things, but also not wanting to go to them while I was writing it. Cause I don't, I think it's, you don't want to be too caught up in your influences when you're doing something. Cause either, maybe something will like kind of sneak in and you start kind of copying that story a little bit. So I think, when I was kind of trying to channel the spirit of these, especially of WALL-E and of Homo Deus and of the Sapiens and of like just the general kind of like tapping into what technology means to me and what I think technology will mean in the future, and the kind of fun of some of the films and books that I've read, and kind of like tapping into the spirit of those things without actually being too heavily influenced by them, or, you know, trying to watch them and read it and watch and read these things, and also turn around and write that same, you know, that same thing. Because I think then, yeah, I would be at risk of maybe plagiarizing by accident, or you know, if nothing else, just kind of feeling a little unoriginal. So yeah, but those were certainly the things that I had in the back of my mind. Yeah, I mean, I mentioned earlier, I sometimes think I kind of have the brain of a 12-year-old. And so but what I do, I think a little bit is, I always try to write if I'm writing for young people, I'm trying to write the book that I would want to read as a young person. If when I was 10 years old, like what did I look for? You know, I read all sorts of different things, but if something was funny, if something could make me laugh, if it just kind of, had a sense of humor throughout, even if it wasn't, you know, just like didn't have to be like a joke book or something, but just something that could just had a sense of humor to it. Like that was something that always drew me to books and to other, you know, forms of creative storytelling. So I think for me, it just starts with like that kind of mentality when I'm writing something, of like wanting to write something that I would want to read when I was that age. And yeah, sense of humor. And even now, I mean, you know, I'm much older now, but I still, you know, if something is funny, if it can make me laugh, that automatically like raises it to a new level in terms of just what I'm going to enjoy. So yeah, I think it's what I enjoy. It's what I've always enjoyed in what I read. And so I try to bring it to the things that I write. And you know, I think it also helps sometimes. Like I kind of find myself, you know, you're getting too serious, or you're getting kind of too emotional or something. And it's kind of a nice way to flip that a little bit. And it kind of, in a way, like a sense of humor, like is like this like spice that like enhances all the other ingredients. So like if you can kind of like laugh, and then a few pages later something sad happens, then the sad thing feels more intense, and the funny thing feels more intense because of the sad thing. And so it just adds a nice contrast to the other stuff going on in the story. I always enjoyed writing from you know, pretty young age. When I was in elementary school, I would write stories, and they also, I was always aiming to like make people laugh. They usually were just like goofy and you know, not in any way, you know, like deeply profound or well written necessarily, but I was kind of just, you know, I would just write stuff to try to make my family laugh when they read it, or, you know, make my friends laugh if I was going to share it with them. So I always enjoyed writing. And I think it was but it was also something that I kind of never really thought I could do as a career. I didn't know any writers growing up. It seemed like something that only, I don't know, like kind of far off old people were able to do. And probably they had some special connection to, you know, whatever mysterious world of writers they all have. And so I think it was just kind of like a fun hobby when I was younger. And then when I got into college, I started writing in a journal, and I started writing short stories. And that's when I kind of started thinking like, oh, this really is something that I find fulfilling in a way that I don't find anything else fulfilling. And I still didn't necessarily think that I would be able to do it as a career, because it just seems like such a far off thought. But it seemed like something that I could at least wanted to do kind of as a hobby. And you know, like, and so for a long time, for years after that, because I didn't get anything published until, you know, I was maybe 30 or so, or 30, in my early 30s. I would write before work. I would write on weekends, and it was, even if I knew it wasn't ever going to be published, I thought, you know, this just kind of fulfills me in a way that I think hobbies should, right? That even if you don't get paid for it, it's like, if you love gardening, you know, you just want to go out and be in the garden, or if you love cooking or something. And then, yeah, so I feel incredibly fortunate to have been able to turn that passion, that thing that makes me feel fulfilled in a way that nothing else does, to take that and turn it into something that actually I can call a career. Through a few different avenues. The kind of most immediate, I guess, is email. So I have my my author email address is on my website. So if anyone wants to reach out, they're more than welcome to. And so sometimes I just have these emails that just pop up, and they're from young people who've read my books or are reading. Sometimes it's like they're in the middle of reading it, and it can be anything from just like, hey, I liked your book, or like, will there be another book will there be a sequel to The Last Human, or something like that, to like, sometimes they're also like sort of asking questions like, oh, when this and this happened, then why did this thing happen? And they can get very, very deep, especially with younger people. I think, there's like this wonderful quality that young people have, because, like, sometimes they've like read the book multiple times in a short period of time, and they know it's more immediate to them than it probably is to me, because it might have been years since I wrote the book. So usually it's often email. I do, when it's not a global pandemic, I'll do school visits. I still occasionally do. I'll do, like, I've done some virtual school visits since everything shut down. And yeah, so that's a good way to kind of connect with young people. And like, so I'll do like a presentation, and I'll kind of talk about myself, and a Q&A, and then usually people come over and talk to me more one-on-one too, which is also nice. And then the other thing is living here in Maplewood. So I have a daughter who's too young my daughter is about 18 months. So she's a little too young for the books right now. But and her friend group is as well. But other kids who like live in the neighborhood, who we kind of see, or we're friends with their parents, they'll kind of come up to me sometimes and want to talk about the books because they've been reading them, or maybe they heard about it because I live close by, and so that's always kind of fun too, just the kind of spontaneous. I remember it wasn't that long ago, some kid was neighbor kid was riding by on his it was like an electric skateboard or something. It's a very futuristic thing. And he just went whizzing by, and he said, "Hey, I'm reading your book right now," and then just like kept going. So sometimes it's it's an email, and sometimes it's a kid on a futuristic skateboard who yells at me. I love it. It's great. So my wife and I moved to Maplewood from Brooklyn. Like a lot of people, we moved from New York. And of course, when you hear Brooklyn, like, one of the great things about Brooklyn is that it has this huge community of creative people of all types, and including writers, and that's absolutely true. But I think because there are so many people writing and doing other creative stuff, and it's kind of more spread out, you kind of can feel a little bit like a little fish in a very, very big pond. And you can go into the cafe, and you've got your laptop, and you look around, and it seems like every other person with the laptop is writing a novel too. And so it's in a weird way, it's actually harder to connect with people because it's less of a unique thing. And in Maplewood, it's I love what a creative town it is, and there are so many people doing interesting stuff in all sorts of different creative stuff, or just kind of who appreciate that too. Not necessarily that they're writing books, but that they have an appreciation for books, or for music, or for theater. But it's also it's smaller, and it's just easier to kind of get to know your neighbors and get to know people. When you're downtown and you're just having some dinner or something. And so I think, yeah, I've been able to form, in a kind of surprising way, I've been able to form more what I feel like are kind of real, sort of like lasting connections with fellow writers. once I moved out here, which yeah, I wouldn't have thought, because you just sort of assume like Brooklyn is this constant sort of sparking world of creativity. But it's also, yeah, Maplewood is, I think, just because it feels like more of a community because it's smaller and it's more, the people are maybe a little bit more connected. I have my next book that's going to be coming out is, I think it's about a year away from being published, but it's going to be published. So that's nice. And it's going to be with the same publisher who came out with the Last Human. It's called Imaginary. I haven't had a chance really to talk to too many people about it because it's still kind of new and in the works. But yeah, it's for the similar audience, sort of middle grade, 8 to 12-year-olds. And the basic premise is it's a story that's narrated by an imaginary friend, and the kid who he's the imaginary friend of is a little too old to have an imaginary friend now. He's 12 years old, and that's definitely older than most people who have imaginary friends. And so it kind of like goes back and forth between, and he also has just a very active imagination. And so we sort of see his real world blending with this kind of fantasy world. And it's another one where I definitely enjoyed, trying to write a very, a humorous story that would hopefully make readers laugh. And, but at the same time, it has a lot of, hopefully deeper emotional things going on that, that kids will be able to appreciate and enjoy. So I'm looking forward to that one. That comes out in about a year.